The moment Sylvia Holt realized her husband had booked the penthouse suite at the Meridian Grand for someone else, she was standing in the hotel's marble lobby holding 2 glasses of champagne. She had planned it as a surprise. 22 years of marriage, and she still believed in those small gestures, showing up unannounced, reminding him that she still thought about him in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. The concierge at the front desk had looked at her with something close to pity when she asked for the room number. He'd glanced at his screen, then back at her, then said very carefully that Mr. Holt had already checked in with his guest. Sylvia set both glasses down on the marble counter. She thanked the young man. She walked back out through the revolving door into the cool Dallas evening, sat in her car in the parking garage for exactly 4 minutes, and then she made a phone call, not to her husband, to her attorney. People who knew Sylvia Holt described her the way people describe furniture in a beautiful room. As part of the backdrop, tasteful, present, easy to overlook. She was the wife who organized the charity galas that her husband Elliot Holt was photographed at. She was the woman who had quietly moved her entire portfolio, nearly $18 million in private investments, into the holding company that became the foundation of Holt Meridian Consulting. She had done this 17 years ago, when Elliot's original firm was 6 months from collapse, and his business partner had just walked out. Elliot had promised to restructure the company ownership once they were stable. They never quite got around to it. That was the thing about Sylvia. She had a gift for patience that other people mistook for passivity. She had watched her husband's confidence grow into arrogance over 2 decades, watched him begin to treat her ideas as his own and her sacrifices as invisible, and she had said very little. Not because she had nothing to say, because she was paying attention. She had been paying attention for a long time. Elliot Holt had met Fiona Driscoll 18 months before that evening in the hotel lobby. Fiona was 34, a regional sales director at a firm that had recently signed a consulting contract with Holt Meridian. Sylvia hadn't known her name at first. She had known only that something had shifted. The particular quality of her husband's distraction. The way he began guarding his phone with the casual ease of someone who had practiced not looking guilty. She hadn't confronted him. She had instead started reading the company financials. The expense reports she technically had access to but had never bothered to review because she had trusted him. Dinners billed to corporate. 2 business-class flights to Chicago that coincided with a weekend she had believed Elliot spent at a client retreat. A hotel stay in Scottsdale. Another in Nashville. Sylvia had a spreadsheet. It had 41 line items. She showed it to no one. She filed it. She waited. The evening at the Meridian Grand was not, as it turned out, a coincidence. Elliot had told Sylvia he was attending a 2-day conference in downtown Dallas hosted by the Association of Independent Consultants. The conference was real. Elliot's attendance was intermittent. He had booked the penthouse for 3 nights using the Holt Meridian corporate card. A card that required dual authorization for any charge above $5,000. Sylvia was the second authorizer. She had approved the charge 5 weeks earlier without looking at the destination. She had been in the middle of coordinating her mother's transition to a memory care facility, and had approved 6 pending charges at once on her phone between phone calls. It was the only time in 11 years she had not read the details. She read them now, sitting in the parking garage, her phone screen bright in the dark. Meridian Grand Hotel Dallas, Suite 1401. 3 nights, $12,400. She pulled up the hotel's website. Suite 1401 was the penthouse. It had a private terrace overlooking uptown and a separate dining room, and came with a complimentary bottle of vintage Bordeaux upon arrival. Sylvia had stayed in that suite once, on their 15th anniversary. Elliot had called it excessive, and said the view wasn't worth the price. She sat with that for a moment. Then she opened her contacts and called her attorney, a woman named Patricia Wren, who had been her college roommate and who did not flinch at anything. "I need you to start the process," Sylvia said. Patricia didn't ask which process. "Tonight?" "Not tonight, but I want everything ready. I want to know exactly what I'm entitled to and I want it documented before he comes home Sunday." Sylvia. Patricia paused. "How long have you been sitting on this?" 11 months. A brief silence. "You're going to be fine." "I know," Sylvia said. "That's why I waited." She drove home. She fed their golden retriever, whose name was Biscuit, and who had been a gift to their daughter Catherine, now 26 and living in Austin. She made herself a cup of tea. She sat at the kitchen table in the house she had decorated and maintained and loved for 19 years. And she thought about the nature of long marriages. There is a particular grief in realizing that the version of a person you have been loyal to no longer exists, that, somewhere along the way, the man you built a life with was quietly replaced by someone who looked the same, and ate dinner across from you, and occasionally touched your shoulder in passing, but who had fundamentally decided that you were not worth the full truth of his life. Sylvia had loved Elliot. She wanted to be clear about that, at least to herself. She had loved him when he was failing and uncertain, and a little scared, when his hands shook slightly before big presentations, and he needed her to tell him he was ready. She had loved the man who used to fall asleep on the couch with Catherine on his chest, who cried at the end of certain movies and then immediately denied it. She did not know who he was now. She wasn't sure he did either, but she knew exactly who she was. Elliot came home Sunday afternoon carrying a leather portfolio and the particular cheerfulness of someone who had just had a very good weekend. He kissed her on the cheek. He said the conference had been excellent, that he'd had a productive dinner with 2 potential clients. That Dallas traffic was something else. Sylvia listened. She made appropriate sounds of interest. She had made chicken piccata, his favorite, and they ate dinner together. And she asked him about the sessions he'd attended. And he described 2 of them with enough convincing detail that she understood he had actually gone to parts of the conference. For cover, she imagined, or habit, or both. After dinner he poured himself a glass of scotch and went to his study. Sylvia cleared the table. She started the dishwasher. She let Biscuit out into the backyard and stood on the porch in the warm evening air, and she thought about timing. Patricia had sent her a secure document file that afternoon. Sylvia had reviewed it over lunch while Elliot was still in Dallas. The picture was clear. Because of the original investment structure from 17 years ago and the way the holding company had been set up, Sylvia held a significant and legally defensible ownership stake in Holt Meridian Consulting. Not as a spouse entitled to marital assets, as an investor and co-founder whose name had simply never been formally attached to the documents she had funded. Patricia had described this to her quietly and precisely. He built the house on land that belongs to you. He just never got around to putting your name on the door. The restructuring that Elliot had promised and never completed had left the company in an interesting legal position, one that Patricia said was very much resolvable in Sylvia's favor provided they moved carefully. Sylvia was very good at careful. She did not say anything that week, or the next. She watched Elliot move through his days with the particular confidence of a man who believes his private life is completely private. He had lunch with Fiona Driscoll on a Wednesday. Sylvia knew because Fiona had checked in at a restaurant on Instagram, tagged the table view, and Sylvia had noticed Elliot's tie in the background of the photo before Fiona deleted it 20 minutes later. He traveled to Houston the following week for what he described as a client meeting. Sylvia spent that week meeting with Patricia, and with a financial advisor named Gerald Cho, who specialized in corporate restructuring. She spent it reading every document in the shared filing system she had always technically had access to and never fully explored. She spent it being very quiet and very certain. She also called Catherine. Catherine drove up from Austin on a Friday night. They sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning, drinking herbal tea and talking the way they hadn't talked in years. Catherine cried a little. Sylvia did not, though she felt the pull of it. That specific ache of having to tell your child that the family she grew up in was built partly on a foundation that had cracked without her knowing. "How are you so calm?" Catherine asked. "I've had time to get here," Sylvia said. "What are you going to do?" Sylvia wrapped both hands around her mug. "I'm going to do what I should have done 17 years ago. I'm going to put my name on the door." The annual Holt Meridian Partners dinner was held on the last Friday of October at the Rosewood Mansion on Turtle Creek. It was the company's most significant social event of the year. Clients, partners, board members, a handful of journalists from the business press. Elliot organized it. He considered it a personal showcase. Sylvia attended every year. She helped select the venue, approved the catering, oversaw the table arrangements. She was, as she had always been, the woman standing slightly to the left of center, making sure everything worked. This year she arranged one additional item. 2 days before the dinner, Patricia filed the initial legal documents establishing Sylvia's formal claim to the original investment stake, and its compounding value over 17 years. The filing was quiet, procedural, not yet public, but it was dated, time-stamped, and it notified Elliot's corporate attorney of record as required by law. Sylvia knew he would receive the notification the morning of the dinner. She had calculated this specifically. She wore deep burgundy to the Rosewood that evening. She had her hair done that afternoon, and she wore the diamond earrings that had belonged to her grandmother, and she looked, as several people told her over the course of the evening, absolutely wonderful. Elliot had called her 3 times between 4 and 6 that afternoon. She had let each call go to voicemail. At 6:15 she texted him. "Running a little behind, see you there." She arrived at 7:10 when the room was full and the cocktail hour was well underway. She saw Elliot the moment she walked in. He was standing near the bar with 2 of the firm's senior partners, and the expression on his face when he spotted her was something she had not seen in many years. He was afraid, not of her exactly, of what she knew and what she had apparently done and what it meant. His attorney had called him, she could tell. The color had gone slightly wrong in his face. He smiled when he saw her, the old reflexive social smile, and crossed the room toward her. "We need to talk," he said quietly when he reached her. "We do," she agreed. "But not here. Tonight is about the company." She smiled at him with genuine pleasantness. "Let's make sure it goes well." He stared at her. She had never looked calmer. "Sylvia." She touched his arm briefly the way she had 10,000 times. The Harrington group just walked in. You should go say hello. We can talk Sunday. He looked at her for another moment, searching for something. Anger, maybe, or fear, or any of the emotions that would have made this more familiar and therefore more manageable. He found nothing that helped him. He went to greet the Harrington group. Sylvia accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server, turned to find the nearest cluster of guests, and spent the next 3 hours being exactly as charming and engaged and gracious as she had been at every Holt Meridian event for the past 2 decades. She talked to clients, she talked to partners, she talked to the journalist from the Dallas Business Journal, who was covering the firm's upcoming expansion, and she was thoughtful and informed in ways that subtly, naturally communicated her deep familiarity with the company's direction. She was not hiding. She was, for perhaps the first time, making sure she was fully visible. They spoke on Sunday as she had said. Elliot arrived at breakfast already taut with the particular tension of someone who has had 3 days to build up a version of things in his head. He sat across from her at the kitchen table and began, as she had expected, with a mixture of offense and explanation. The filing was premature. There must be a misunderstanding. He had always intended to formalize the arrangement. This wasn't the right moment. Could they please discuss this like adults before involving attorneys? Sylvia let him talk. She poured him coffee. She waited until he had finished. Then she placed a folder on the table between them. It contained a summary, prepared by Patricia and Gerald together, of what the original investment had been worth, what it had generated over 17 years at a conservative estimate, and what Sylvia's legal claim amounted to. It also contained a proposal, not for divorce, not yet. For restructuring. I want what was promised, she said. Formal recognition of my stake. Board representation. My name in the founding documents, retroactively corrected. She paused. I've been patient, Elliot. 17 years is long enough. He looked at the folder, then at her. And if I don't agree? Then Patricia takes it through the courts, and it becomes public, and it takes 18 months instead of 6 weeks. She met his eyes. But you'll agree, because you know I'm right, and because the alternative is much worse for the company than having me at the table. The silence in the kitchen was long. Biscuit walked through from the hallway and settled under the table with a sigh. What about us? Elliot said finally. Sylvia considered the question. She had thought about this more than anything else. Not the money, not the legal claim, but this. The 22 years. The early years when she had believed entirely in what they were building together. The way love, when it goes wrong, doesn't announce itself clearly but instead recedes so gradually that you spend a long time wondering if it was ever as solid as you thought. I think, she said slowly, that we've been something other than honest with each other for a long time. You in obvious ways, me in quieter ones. She picked up her coffee cup. I should have asked for this 17 years ago. The fact that I didn't, that I just trusted it would come, that was my mistake, and I'm not going to make it again. That's not the same thing, he said. No, she agreed, it isn't. But I'm not here to keep score on who hurt who more. I'm here because I built something and I want it recognized. He looked out the kitchen window for a long moment. The morning light was doing something particular with the yard, turning everything that pale gold that only October in Texas can produce, the kind of light that makes ordinary things look briefly like they're worth keeping. What happens after? He asked. I don't know yet, she said honestly, but I'm not going to pretend I do. The formal restructuring took 9 weeks. Patricia described it as remarkably smooth, given the circumstances, which Sylvia understood to mean that Elliot's attorney had taken one look at the documentation and advised his client not to fight it. Sylvia was formally named a founding partner of Holt Meridian Consulting, her historical investment recognized, her seat on the board established. Her name appeared at last on the founding documents, correct placed, correctly dated. She sent Patricia a bottle of wine she had been saving for something good. The thing about being underestimated for a long time is that when you finally step into the full shape of yourself, it surprises people who thought they knew you. Some of the Holt Meridian partners reached out to congratulate her, in ways that were slightly stunned, as though they had not quite understood until now, who had been sitting in that room at all the company dinners. One of the senior partners, a man named Douglas Firth, who had worked alongside Elliot for 12 years, called her directly and said, with what sounded like genuine respect, that he was glad she was formally part of the leadership. I always assumed you were, he said. I'm sorry it took this long to be official. Sylvia thanked him and hung up and sat for a moment with that. She was in some ways still getting used to being someone people looked at directly. She and Elliot did not reconcile. She had not expected to, and she found as the weeks passed that she did not want to. That what she felt was not the raw pain of betrayal so much as a kind of clarity, as though the life she had been living inside had finally been brought into focus. She moved into the guest suite in December, then into a smaller house she bought for herself in January, a stone craftsman in the Lakewood neighborhood with a good kitchen and a garden that had been neglected and needed work. She liked that it needed work. Catherine came up from Austin for the move, and helped her unpack boxes and hang curtains, and put books on the shelves in the order that made sense to Sylvia rather than to anyone else. They ordered Thai food, and ate it on the floor of the new living room. And Catherine said the house felt like her. Like the real you, she said. Like who you were before you started making yourself smaller. Sylvia thought about that for a long time after Catherine drove back to Austin. She wasn't sure she had made herself smaller, exactly. She thought it was something slightly different. That she had invested herself so entirely in something shared, that she had neglected to keep her own account current. She had trusted that her presence was enough, that the foundation she had laid would always have her name on it in some form. Even unwritten. She knew better now. Fiona Driscoll, for what it's worth, ended things with Elliot sometime in November. Sylvia heard this from Catherine, who heard it from a mutual friend in a way that suggested Fiona had concluded that a man in the middle of a very expensive corporate restructuring was perhaps not the romantic prospect she had imagined. Sylvia felt nothing particular about this information. She did not take pleasure in it. She did not find it vindicating. It was simply a thing that had happened, a detail at the edge of a story that was no longer centrally about anyone but her. Elliot, by all accounts, was fine. He remained CEO of Holt Meridian. He was good at his job, had always been good at his job. She had never disputed that. He sent her a text on her birthday in February. It said, "Hope it's a good one." She replied, "Thank you." That was the last time they spoke. There is a particular season in Dallas in early spring, when the redbud trees bloom along the parkways in that improbable electric purple. And the mornings are cool enough to still want a sweater, but the afternoons tilt toward warmth, in a way that feels like a promise. Sylvia was in the garden on one of those mornings, in old jeans and the flannel shirt she had designated for yard work, trying to rehabilitate a climbing rose that had been left too long without structure. She was not thinking about Elliot. She was thinking about the rose. About the right way to prune something that has grown wrong for years. How you have to be willing to cut back more than feels comfortable to give it a real chance. How the growth you want comes after the loss of what was there before. She was thinking about the board meeting the following week, which she had been preparing for, and was genuinely looking forward to in a way that surprised her. She had opinions. She had been developing them for 20 years without anywhere clear to put them. Now she had somewhere to put them. She was thinking about the garden itself, what she was becoming inside it, how strange and good it was, to be somewhere that needed her attention in simple physical ways that answered back honestly. Her phone rang. "Catherine. How's the rose?" Catherine asked. She had been updated on the rose situation. "Complicated," Sylvia said. "But I think it's going to be okay." "That's basically the update I needed," Catherine said, and Sylvia could hear her smiling. She stayed in the garden another hour after they hung up. The sun came out from behind a bank of clouds and laid itself across the yard in that full, even morning light that makes everything look clear and uncomplicated and entirely possible. She picked up her pruning shears. She got back to work.